we thought on the morning scramble that it probably would be appropriate to recognize the fact that this is, after all, Holy Week. And as unholy as the crowd is down here at AZTV, let us share reflections as we go into the biggest celebration that exists, and many will say the holiest of weekends in Christianity. We do so with the help of the Reverend Doyle Burbank-Williams. And Reverend Williams, you provide ministry where?
I'm the pastor at Scottsdale Congregational United Church of Christ.
And you were recommended highly by a good friend of this program, David Felton, has not only been on sermonizing, sharing ideas and thoughts, but also playing various musical instruments. The guy is a tremendously versatile person. We don't even ask you to provide entertainment. We just ask you to provide great wisdom as we ask you questions leading into tomorrow about what Good Friday should be. We know what it is said to have been historically. What should it be for the rest of us?
Well, you know, I think that's a pretty varied question. One of the problems that a lot of us are confronting with Christianity is that it is presumed to be some kind of monolithic school of thought, that there is one right way, and that if you're not on that way, somehow you're on the wrong way.
Hasn't that thought, however, been presented at pulpits around the world?
Oh, I think certain pulpits. But there are an awful lot of us that recognize that since the very beginning, Christianity has had a variety of opinions and expressions. And even the idea that tomorrow is sometimes referred to as Good Friday. You know, there really were some pretty horrific events that occurred. And in one school of thought, it is good because that's the way they understand how God fixed the problem of sin. For some of us, Jesus' crucifixion is more evidence of our own capacity for cruelty to each other, and yet out of that grows an expression of redeeming love.
Is the resurrection the absolute foundation of Christianity?
You know, I don't know if you're talking about a specific historical event being the foundation of Christianity. I would likely have to say no, because I think it has been people's ongoing experience of a living presence that really founded it. That if, you know, I wasn't around 2,000 years ago. There weren't TV cameras around 2,000 years ago. We don't know what happened in Jerusalem. But if the followers of Jesus hadn't had some kind of ongoing experience, if they hadn't had something that said to them in their hearts and in their lives, you know, this isn't over, I don't think we would have heard much about it. And it's been that kind of experience for 2 millennia that people keep discovering that in some way God is bringing new life back into their lives, and we who are Christians, as the name implies, call that Christ.
Regardless of the reporting staff called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
Many people, and I mean, I think that they are well-intentioned people, many people say, if with all of the news outlets that we have now, and with all of the sources of information, instantaneous information, and if we can't agree on what happened 3 hours ago, how can we possibly ever even come close to basing the beliefs of a billion or so people on what happened 2,000 years ago without any of that technology?
Well, and I think the presumption that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are news reporters is wrong-headed from the get-go.
Well, who were they then?
They were believers. And they were trying to write about what they believed, who they believed Jesus was, what they believed God was doing in Jesus' life.
Biased?
And, oh, absolutely. to their own opinion. I mean, that's a part of why 4 Gospels got included in the Bible, is because those testimonies each come from a very different perspective, and any attempt to try and conflate them into one unified story really denies the integrity of each telling of that story, and their intent was not to say this is the way it happened, but was to say this is who we think Jesus was and why he was important to us and why he ought to be important to you. It wasn't to accurately describe the geography around the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't to provide an exact chronology of Jesus' life. It was to say, this Jesus changed our lives, and this is who we see Jesus to be.
Seems like an awful lot of people, particularly during this election year, however, do think of them as reporters that have provided us absolute fact.
You know, if in the political process, even facts get to be slippery things.
Maybe most particularly during the political
Probably
process.
most particularly. And I think one of the things that our culture has kind of lost sight of is that there is a kind of truth that doesn't have anything to do with facts. There is the kind of truth that is the kind of truth about what makes life worth living. I mean, the easiest example of the difference between truth and facts are Jesus' parables. Because, he said a man went down on the road from Galilee and was attacked by robbers. Well, the road from Jericho, excuse me. He wasn't talking about a specific event, but, those who know the story of the Good Samaritan understand the real truth that comes, especially when Jesus asked that question. So who was a neighbor to that person? And it was the one who cared for his needs. There is that kind of life-changing truth in the resurrection of Jesus, regardless of what the historical facts may be.
As the scriptures have told us, and from other sources too, about that period of time, what should we be telling our kids about Easter? Many of whom relate only to the bunnies and the chocolate and the Easter egg rolls.
Well, the bunnies and the eggs and even the name Easter itself actually have nothing to do with anything in the Bible.
What's the origin of Easter, the word?
The origin of the word Easter comes from the dawn goddess Estra. And all of those are symbols of new life. It doesn't take long for a couple of bunnies to become a lot of bunnies. And eggs themselves are these mysterious symbols of life. They're these hard, almost rock-looking things that suddenly become chicks and birds. The dawn is a rebirth every morning when the sun comes back. And those who were trying to tell the story of Jesus looked at all of those symbols and said, we can add another layer to that. Those symbols can help us understand what we know about Jesus still living and about the kind of new life that comes when we experience death of all sorts of kinds.
People are watching the Morning Scramble, perhaps before some of them get to the office, and they're going to want to use that information that you just passed out about the origin of the word of Easter. And it sounds to me like it's another one of those pagan propaganda items, that all of a sudden it was the goddess Esther. Is that who it was?
Yes, the goddess Estra is one of the sources of that.
You're on shaky ground there, Reverend.
The early Christians were geniuses at instead of trying to wipe out the cultural expressions of spirituality that they found as Christianity spread out through the different lands, they were geniuses at taking the local spiritual expressions and embracing them and adding to them a Christian meaning.
So if it wasn't broken, they didn't try to fix it.
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't think that early Christians would have gone in anywhere where they were practicing human sacrifice and would have said, well, let's continue to do that. But where there was already depth and meaning, instead of trying to stamp that out, the early Christians said, well, let's add to that meaning.
Give me a preview of Sunday's sermon in 1 minute. This coming Sunday, Easter Sunday, what is the Reverend going to be talking to his congregation about?
Easter is not something that happened to Jesus. Easter is something that happens to us. Easter is not something that happened 2,000 years ago. Easter is something that occurs in our lives today and continues to occur as we discover new life in all sorts of ways.
Said eloquently by the Reverend Doyle Burbank-Williams. And by the way, it is okay, you heard it from him, to do the eggs and the chocolate and the bunnies and all of those things. And that's coming up next on the Morning Scramble.